Good morning. It's so good to see you, and I'm pleased that you're with me for this presentation. I'll share my screen, where we are going to be looking at a really important question to all of us right now, which is basically, how do we grow self-directed learners with habits of mind? When we are thinking about this question, we've learned an awful lot during the pandemic. So let's just look for a moment at some of the things that I know that we all have learned, which is that self-directed learning must be explicitly taught and requires time and reflection, and that we need to increase the opportunities in which we're asking students to be self-directed. So our insights about engagement are really that we're asking the question because none of us really likes to see that row of black screens if we're remote, or even if they're in class and they're looking at us, but with the masks on, we're beginning to notice that we need to be paying more attention to how do we make sure that as we're expecting students to be more self-directed, they're engaged with us, that they're looking at us, that they're talking with us, that they're ready for some interaction. So a couple of other insights that we've had about engagement are, first, the teacher talk does not always engage student learning. No matter how clever we are, no matter how exciting we are, that there's a limit to how much people can actually absorb. I'm sure you're finding this in the conference, which is you begin to feel like, I just need a little break and I need to be thinking about what you're saying. The second is that compliance does not necessarily mean self-direction, meaning I may do the tasks that you ask me to do, I may fulfill the assignments, but that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm on to some engagement that will motivate my self-direction. And finally, the students need challenging tasks and critical conversations to engage them in and motivate them for learning. So this means that we have to kind of look and see what is our intention when we're really giving students an opportunity to practice self-direction. So we are now going to look at what we believe, Art Costa and I, in our work with habits of mind, are really critically central to self-direction, because habits of mind are a set of thinking dispositions. So they're really about how do we challenge you to do thinking. They're social, emotional, and cognitive behaviors. In other words, they're ones that help us to respond effectively and respond thoughtfully. But they're also, habits of mind are also those that are a part of our social and emotional framework. The competencies, for example, where we're asking students to be more socially aware, to be more interested in how they're working with one another, to be more self-managing and more self-relational, being sure that they're paying attention to the relationships that they have. So if you'll notice, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the habits of mind are these behaviors. Now notice something important. They're all behaviors. They're all ing words, meaning they're about acting. They're about skills. They're about something that you can learn. They can be taught. You can learn them, and you can get better at it. So notice that, for example, when I'm saying that they're about your social and emotional relationships with others, it really talks to the question of, am I listening with understanding and empathy? Am I able to not only hear what you're saying, affirm that I understand it, but am I also empathic to the way that this experience is making you feel? How do I really know that I'm engaged with that? So we're really looking at these and thinking about these habits of mind. And so I'm going to ask you to enter in the chat, where and when did one of these habits of mind help you stay self-directed during this difficult time? Which of these really kind of jump out at you and say, you know, what I found was that I was able to persist when, or I was responding with wonderment and awe, and how that helped me to feel more motivated, more self-directed, more able to manage this time, this very difficult time. Now, I'm sure that you found that there are ways in which persisting, for example, has helped you, and you're beginning to pay attention to that. So here's something that we can do with our students. So a real out of the gate good idea is if we want the students to be paying attention to habits of mind, and by the way, you don't need to do all 16, you can choose some specific to what you see is going on in your classroom with your students and what they might need. But you might be starting, for example, as many do, and this teacher did, a sixth grade teacher in California, and she said, I'm going to teach persisting explicitly. I'm going to make it clear to students that should be in their repertoire. This is something that they can do. And she started by saying, well, let me ask my students. She modeled it. She said something about her own persisting. And then she said, let me model this with the students and then have the students think about experiences during remote when they were home where they really needed to persist. And she sent the opportunity for Google Zoom slides, and they did their Google slides and they submitted them. So here's one from John Paul Harrow. And he said, doing my chores. So routine messed up. One thing I persisted to do during the quarantine was to do my chores. Doing my chores was easy when I was in school because I would do them after school. But when school got closed, I got totally sidetracked. You know, I was happy when this whole quarantine started, but I think I have completely lost it. An attempt. My first attempt at solving my chore problem was to wake up early. So notice now he's waking up early, but honestly, he doesn't really get to it. He's distracted. Then he says, my solution. After many days of sleeping till 1 p.m, I came up with a solution. I would do my chores after I did my schoolwork. You're probably wondering why I didn't do this in the first place. Well, I honestly don't know. I guess I didn't think of it till now. My chores are one thing I persisted on doing this week. Thanks for listening. So notice what we have here is a student who is really saying, here's how I persisted in the chores that I was supposed to do. And what helped me was I started and I tried to develop some strategies. I tried to wake up early. That didn't work. I tried to not distracting myself. Well, that didn't work. And then I finally decided that the best thing was to just do it later in the day so I could sleep, which is what I like to do. I came up with doing my schoolwork first and then doing my chores. Now, the incredibly important part of all this self-managing is that you have the idea of what do I do when I need to persist? I know the meaning of it. I know that you've told me it's important, but what are some strategies that I use that help me to persist? Here's what a table group did in a high school, where they were trying to think about persistence and saying, what are some strategies that I use? Now, notice again, all of these strategies, this particular teacher keeps them posted for students. It's something that they keep adding to. As you can see, it would be very easy to do this dynamically with some web-based opportunity to do diagramming like this. But the idea here is, when I'm stuck, what do I do? What strategies do I have? So that's very significant because it begins to ask students to draw on their own experience, to not think about this idea as something external to them. And every person has had a time that they can remember when they really persisted, and then what helped them to get through it when it was so challenging and they were stuck. So we begin to now see that this idea of self-management is really, really important for students, and it's not foreign. In fact, we want to think of this as progressively learner-driven. We want students to begin to think about, when do I need to persist? What is it that I need to do? And that's not just true for persisting. I just use that as one example. But what we're suggesting is, for example, if I were to say in my class next week, I want you to be able to be thinking flexibly. This is something where you have math problem solving, and probably there are two things you're going to need to do. You're going to need to be managing your impulsivity. Don't jump to come to a conclusion as to what you need to do without making sure you understand the problem. And at the same time, you're going to need to be thinking flexibly. If one alternative doesn't work, try another. So in that instance, it's teacher generated. I'm telling you which habits will be most useful to you, And I'm explaining to you why I think they're most important in this particular situation. On the other hand, it may be that it's teacher and learner co-created, meaning I say to the students, remember when we did a really tough math problem the other day? What were some of the habits that were most helpful to you? And how might you begin to use them to remind yourself of how to stick with it today? Now we're co-creating the possibility as to which of these will be most helpful to you. And we're all kind of generating perhaps different ones and then learner generated. Which one of these do I feel I most need to use today in my lesson? It may be that I'm emotionally upset today. So what will be most helpful to me? Which of the habits of mine are personally most helpful? So notice this shift here basically suggests that we can move along here and we can become more learner driven, less learner driven. We move along, and as we do, this begins to tell us a story of moving from teacher generated, I always need to be reminded, to learner generated. I do this because it's indeed beginning to be a habit of mind. The next thing that I wanted us to think about is opportunities to practice self-direction. So now that we've established the habits of mind in our classrooms, and we're beginning to understand how they really are the kinds of dispositions we're looking for with our students, let's now just look and see where are the opportunities to practice self-direction. So I'm suggesting 3 that I know we do quite frequently. When you're learning a new skill, it's a great opportunity to practice self-management, self-direction, because we know when we have a class of perhaps 25 to 30 students, everybody is going to be at a different pace. Everybody is going to have different needs. And so this is a time when I need to be an advocate for myself. I need to say how I'm going to learn the skill, what kind of time I think I need, what kind of help I think I need, and how this is really going to help me to be more managing of what it is I need to learn. And it's because I want to get into the practice. I want to start to play the game. So if I'm learning this skill, and it may be not a single skill, but it may be a number of skills, I want to get to the place where I want to write the story, because you asked, can I create something that's fictional and interesting and imaginative? So I want to move from managing, knowing how to actually do the work, to practicing and seeing, how do I apply it? Where can I apply it? And then finally, I may do a project where I'm actually now saying I'm going to not only write this, but it's a script. And I want it to be a script for a play that I want to actually do a film on. I'm playing with you, but you see what I'm saying is, when we're asking students to be self-managing and self-directed, we want to move them along knowing that there's a distinction between when I do something well, when I'm developing a skill, when I'm needing to have more support, and when I'm practicing and applying it, and finally, when I'm then demonstrating that I actually have some better level of success with it. So I'm going to now give you some examples of that. And the first one is when I'm struggling to learn. So this is the challenge that we're thinking about. When you're challenged in any of those situations, most often you're challenged with a new skill, something you thought you could never do. Or it may be that I've given you a challenge. I want you to be able to create a film and you've never done a film before. When you're facing the challenge, just think for a moment, how do you feel? How does it make you feel when you're really feeling like, gee, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can do this. So let's just get in touch with that feeling, what it looks like and what it feels like to be struggling when you're challenged with something you're just not sure of. And now that you're remembering, oh, from a habits of mind perspective, I might be saying, I may have to just take a responsible risk here. And once you do, you get into the pit, because the pit is where the struggle occurs. If you're doing any deep learning, if you're doing something that's tough to learn, you're in the pit of the struggle of learning. And there's nothing that is the silver bullet from that. There's nothing that gets you out easily. You just have to persist. You have to continue to work hard and you have to stay with it. So that's where those strategies for persisting really become prominent. And I would suggest that if you help students know, it's so interesting, but very often they don't realize the backstory of someone who's done something already and done it well. For example, you might say, oh, I made this presentation, but I don't tell you the backstory of how many iterations and different slides I put in, how many experts, how many people I consulted, some of my best good friends who are also consultants. Hey, talk with me about it. How would this get better? Show me how I might make this slide different. Help me think about this. So for me, I go into the pit thinking, oh gosh, I sure hope this is going to be good because this is a keynote and it has to be. Slide right down in. And then what's going to help me get out of the pit? Well, I have to persist. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's drudgery. Sometimes it's not stuff I want to do. Like I'm not keen on finding the right font sometimes. But then I think I have to do that if I want it to be good and if I want it to look well. And so I work at it. And those persisting ideas are often for me. When I'm struggling the most, I turn to some of my peers and say, help me with this. In other words, I have in my backpack tools that I use, strategies that I use that help me to stay with the task all the way to notice I'm climbing my way out of the pit and I'm successful. I may say the habit of mind that I feel most at this moment is responding with wonderment and awe. Wow. But notice I started at a level here. And when I went down into the pit, I went below that level. And when I come out, notice I'm at a higher level. So struggling to learn should really help you with realizing that backstory of going through, struggling with it, working hard, not quitting, have strategies, knowing who you can turn to, beginning to think more about thinking flexibly. If it's a project where you're creating, imagining, and innovating, beginning to call for that habit of mind, using your design work, thinking about it, and then successful, that you've actually done something. And what I'm going to suggest is self-direction and self-managing is really about everything that I'm saying. It's about what you do before you start to struggle, before you meet the challenge. It's what you do during the challenge when you're monitoring and trying to figure out what's in my backpack that I can use that's going to help me do this better, that's going to help me, for example, any strategies that I have, how I use the internet, how I fact check, what I do to make sure I'm getting to the right place. And then finally, in my backpack is always that opportunity for reflection. What happens after? So I not only celebrate what I've done, but I also then am able to say that I'm not only celebrating, but I've learned something that I'm going to apply next time. So struggling to learn. Now I'm just going to stop for a moment and just let you process that much before we go any further. Where I'm going now is to give you examples from classrooms. So here's one, and I hope you're using the chat so that you can have an opportunity to chat with one another, begin a little sense making in the chat so that you're able to then raise questions, ask things. And of course, I'll be with you later if you would like to have a question that you'd like me to try to work with you on. So just pay attention to what it is that you're learning right now and begin to think about, how does that make sense to me? So here's an example from a classroom where a student is doing self-monitoring. This teacher has set it up in a nice way. For example, this is for a document-based informal essay. So she starts with the learning targets. Now notice, when we're asking students to be self-monitoring about the work that they're doing, the learning targets become critically important. And the more precise you can be with them, The more you're clear about the expectations you have, the easier it's going to be for them to do the monitoring check-in. So, for example, for historical theme, notice what she's done here. She's taken it and she's put it into I can statements. So the learning target then becomes also an assessment. So in self-monitoring, you're monitoring, do I get it? So she says, what you need to get is I can explain the importance of the historical context and theme in my own words. Now notice how targeted that is. And then the student has the option, got it, done. Developing, I'm not so sure about this. Feedback, I have underlined where you show the big ideas. So in other words, I may be developing, and as a teacher now, I'm giving you some feedback based on that specific target. And then I'm saying, it's all prepared. So when I do my I can statements on one side, and when I do my feedback on the other side, I'm already connecting the feedback to the learning target. And then I'm suggesting what the student could have done to make it better. So I have underlined where you show the big idea in your introduction and conclusion. And then I'm suggesting, say this in your own voice. Remember, theme in my own words. Explain importance of the theme. Why does this matter? How is this becoming a turning point? And then connect the facts to historical theme. Now, I have feedback suggestions like this because, as you know, there are patterns in students' work. And so I can have a list of them. I look at where the student is in the work that they're showing me. I want to know, they want to know, do I have it? Got it? And then if it's developing, which of these strategies might I try? So notice that we're getting students used to self-monitoring as they go along, paying attention to what they've done. And this becomes critically important as they become more self-managing. Here's another example. Here's a student learning plan. Now, this is one that we give to students and we say, okay, we want you to be able to, from a personalized perspective, be self-discovering. Think about what it is you're learning about yourself. So the first thing is, I want you to talk about what you're learning about yourself as a learner. What are you good at? And I'm asking you specifically, which skills? What do you feel you need to practice? Specifically, which skills? And then I need to learn the basics related to these skills. Now notice, this is the opportunity to practice skill building. I know I need to learn these. If I learn these, I'm going to be better in my group work. I'm going to be better project-based. I'm going to be able to use what I'm learning to move forward. So this is a time when you want the student to develop their own student learning plan. Now notice how this is, again, an opportunity for self-managing. What do I need to do? And then, if you see at the bottom, I will complete the next steps above by, and you put a specific date. Now you can say to yourself, if I have too many to put here, my next steps are going to be way too far away. So we help the students learn how to do what Fogg calls, he's a professor from Stanford University, and he refers to it as tiny habits. And what he's saying is when you want to see a change in behavior, when you want to see students learn how to manage themselves differently, start with tiny habits. When you have a goal that is too big, what happens is you don't really get it done because it's so large. It kind of might remind you of those New Year's Eve goals that you make, that the next 2 weeks, you're like, I'm going to do these exercises every day. Absolutely. And within 2 weeks, it's like, well, maybe not today. And within a month, it's, well, maybe not so much. And before you know it, it's too big, it's too large, and it's gotten mixed into all the other things that you do in your life. So you begin to say, if I made a tiny goal, just a tiny one. So suppose I said, instead of saying, I don't know, I'm going to exercise every day, I say, I am going to walk 1,000 steps every day. You notice how many people on their Apple Watches are doing that. Like, oh, I'll just do this many steps. This is how many I need. So you're then paying attention to something that you feel is doable, and you're going to start slow and small, and you're going to build it, and you're going to then find that you're making it more of a habit. I think we know this instructionally. Many of us have used, for example, sustained silent writing or sustained silent reading. And what we know is we start reading, and we only have the students doing silent reading for maybe 3 minutes, because we're trying to get them to screen out distractions, maintain a focus, and stay at reading. And day by day, we gradually increase it because they develop the capacity to sustain and to do the work increased over time. So when you're doing something like a student learning plan, have the students start small, make the targets small, doable, actionable, and then sign off on it to ensure that they're actually getting ready for example, an assessment. Another one is to show their learning targets. And again, here what we've done is we've given learning strategy options. So it's another variation on the one where we had the students saying, got it, developing, and the teacher gives them some strategies. Now in this, we're giving them strategies and we're asking them, which of these do you want to use? Which of these will help you most? And then we always give number 3 in the first, number 4 in the second, my own strategy. So what we're doing here is we're cultivating and developing strategic thinkers, students who can become more strategic. It's more personalized. It's all about me, who I am, and what works for me. So some would say, what works for me both is I always like to have a partner. That happens to be my preferred. However, I know people who say, I like to be left alone. I remember one teacher said to me when I was asked to coach her in terms of developing some progress with curriculum design and development. And I asked her, tell me a little bit about what works best for you when you're a designer. And she said, if I could have time to just sit in the library all by myself, surround myself with some books that I've chosen, and just think, reflect, and work, I would do the best job possible. And instead, I'm constantly being asked to get in a group, to work with other teachers, to do this work collaboratively. I'm not opposed to collaboration, but for me, my best work is done when I just have time to think and reflect alone. So notice, this is something that we need to not only know about ourselves, but be advocates for, learn to develop the voice, be able to say to the teacher, I know that everybody else is working in groups, but for this particular development of a skill, I need to be on my own. I need to have time to reflect before I join the group. I'm not saying I'm not a team person. I'm not saying I don't see the importance of being in a team, but I need to be an advocate for what also will work best for me so that I can be successful with the work. So you notice how, again, we're marrying our learning targets and we're then encouraging our students. Here are some strategies that have worked for others, but do they work for you? And if not, how do you begin to be an advocate for what will work for you so that you learn as much as you possibly can about yourself as a learner? It's all about self-managing. I'll just stop for a moment because I've said a lot and let you again interact in the chat, think about what I'm saying, and see how it makes sense to you. Now, another place where we really want to develop more self-managing is when students are self-assessing, because this is a great opportunity for them to know where they are. And just as we see this little girl and we all know how we feel, am I getting taller? How many inches have I grown? I want to know. I want to be big. I want to think that I can, reach to the top. So we're always thinking about how we improve, and self-assessing is a serious part of self-direction, growing that. And so here are some examples now of teachers who provide this for students. Now you notice this is a math rubric example and it's for grades 2 to 5. So that's rather nice because in this school, what they decided was we're going to use this rubric, grades 2 to 5, meaning every year we're going to keep reinforcing it. This is really what we believe is the best math problem solving tool that we can provide for them. So notice they started with the learning goals. They said, we need to understand, you see that this is a problem solving routine. I need to understand the problem. I need to plan to solve the problem. I need to use mathematical language. I need to be able to explain, and I need to really make sure that the answer matches up and makes sense. Now, I should say to you, because I'm showing you so many examples, I put all of these in this slideshow is in a PDF for you, and it's in your resources with this keynote. So you'll be able to go to all of these and blow them up and see what's in here and read the details of it. I encourage you to go ahead and adapt. If these are things, anything in here that makes sense to you, every teacher is sharing this gracefully and gratefully, saying, I have learned from others. I'm sharing my ideas with you. So feel free. I think we all as teachers share well with one another using and developing these ideas. But I want to point out something really important, and that is notice the language across the top of this rubric. I'm a novice, meaning, gee, I'm just starting, and I need the problem. I read the problem, but I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. And then emerging, I read the problem. I tried to figure it out, but I couldn't figure out what was important. And then we get to proficient. I read the problem and identified what was important. And finally, in exemplary, I read the problem, identified what was important, and the ideas behind it. Now, notice that it's a progression. And again, it moves from gradually becoming more self-directed and also knowing where I am in the scale from a beginner. Remember the learning pit. If I believe that the backstory is that you don't get to exemplary without going through some of the steps, that exemplary is kind of, I'm there and I got it. But the backstory is often, I need to think about it. I need to read the problem better. I need to understand what was important. And then I'm making my way out of the pit. And now I'm reading the problem, identifying what it was, and knowing what's important. I also want to point out to you that I think that the language of novice to exemplary is a better language, in my opinion, in terms of the message that we give students. Sometimes I see the message being, awesome, you got it, you're great, awesome. And I'm a little concerned sometimes that those awesome counterpoint to, not yet, you're not there yet, I think kind of sometimes delivers a message to students that I may never be awesome. I sure wish I could be awesome. I'm just suggesting that we pay attention to the descriptors in a rubric that deliver a message to students and to make sure that they are as inclusive as possible. And also always, I share that learning pit with students, teachers do all the time. It makes sense. There are lots of other examples of learning pits. If you Google learning pit, you'll see lots of other graphics. But I think it's really important for students to know we all go down the pit. So don't ever say, this is so hard, I'll never get it, because we all go down the pit. The smartest kid in the class has gone down the pit for something and knows what it means to struggle. So this is lovely because this can show how you progress over time. When you have this grades 2 through 5, you'll see that this works, but the complexity of the problems that you're being asked to do really also demand more from you. So although you may have been exemplary last year, you may not be exemplary this year because, again, you're in the pit of new learning. Here's another one. This is Scott Wright, who's a 6th grade teacher in New York State. And here's what he's done. He's taken the standards from New York State. And what he's done is he said, okay, got it. And what he does is a not yet to got it. And he does it as a scoring procedure. I get not yet, I'm in the red, I really don't have it yet. I get +2, I get 3, I get 3 plus, or I get 4. Now, notice what I think is really important. He also marries the habits of mind to what he's doing. So he says, for example, in this standard, gather important information and quote or paraphrase details clearly and accurately in your own words. And then he says, I can, and his I can statements are, I can take responsible risks by sharing ideas and questions with the reader of my notebook. I can read with understanding and empathy. So notice that he's taking it and again, gather and use grade level words and subject matter vocabulary to express understanding. Now notice the I can. I can collect data and then reflect. Think about my thinking. I can think and communicate with clarity and precision. Now, the other thing that he does that I think is interesting is he has the students do the self-assessment, my score, and then the teacher score. Now, what I have seen happen very often is the kids tend to underestimate, not overestimate in self-assessment. Very often they think they're not doing as well as we might think they're doing. We might see them coming along very well and they may feel, oh, I'm not there yet. I don't know if I'm ever going to get there. So if you find that the teacher score and the student score doesn't match, it's a fabulous opportunity for a conference because there are a couple of things that can happen in such a conference. The first is because it's standards-based, you can check to see, do they understand the standard? If you unpack it into the work that they're doing, is it clear? Is it evident? Perhaps one of the reasons they're not doing well is because they don't really get what this is saying. Maybe they don't even understand the word paraphrase. Maybe they really need to hear more about what this means. So that's an opportunity to do some coaching. And then the other piece of this is if they're not doing, if you think they're doing better than what they think, you can point it out. You know, I'm just wondering why you gave yourself a 2 plus and I gave you a 3. So I'm curious to know, what did you see? What was the evidence that you looked at in your work that suggested a 2 plus? And then here's what I saw as evidence that suggested a 3. And that way, again, you're giving them a better understanding of what you're looking for in the work and how to become more accurately and efficiently self-assessing, and also not being afraid to just say, hey, I'm doing okay. I'm getting there. It's a struggle, but I am getting there. And we all need that. We all need to learn how to pat ourselves on the back, to feel better about the fact that we're almost. And that very often it takes a lot till you get to that green. I got it. I know it. I understand this now. And sometimes got it is very ephemeral because you get it in this situation and it doesn't transfer to the next. Learning is complex, as we all know. So when you learn to be more self-assessing, when you begin to see the habits of mind that support your assessing, when you begin to see how that works for you in terms of your learning, you're beginning to build the growing habits for self-managing and self-monitoring, and then finally managing how you think about that. Another example we have is from grade 2. And with grade 2, this one is from a school in Edmonton, Canada. And one of the things that I love is when I visited there, they had a big banner in the school that was, it said actually, think back, look ahead. And that's in every classroom. And it means think back, think about what you've been learning and reflect upon that. Look ahead, set your goals, see where you're going next. So in this particular class in grade 2, the teacher did this. She decided to do grade 2 number operations unit, and she had a little log, I guess it was like a little notebook. And the notebook was basically one that students kept. It was their math notebook. And in it, she would have, for example, the first thing was the learning outcomes. So it was a pre-printed sheet that went into the notebook, and it said, I can use manipulatives to show and describe addition to 100 without regrouping. Now notice she's saying that's the I can statement. That's my learning target. That's what I want the kids to be able to do. Then she said, use manipulatives to show, and she gives them a problem so that they can show how they're going to be able to demonstrate their adding 25 and 33. And then the other one is create another problem of your own to demonstrate your understanding. So don't you love the idea that she gives one, they give one? And the evidence is when you make one up, can you make one up? That's often a challenge, especially I like this when I see algebra teachers doing things like this. And kids make up very complex problems, and then they have to solve it. So it's really interesting to see how much do I understand the dynamics of the problem solving? And then how do I show you evidence of it? And then the date when I got it, I understand it. It's mine now. I'm managing myself. I'm self-assessing. I'm beginning to see how to manage my learning targets, how to make them happen, how to work on them, and then how to show you the work that I'm doing. This one was one that was co-created in a second grade. And this was by a teacher in Texas. And what she did was she decided that she was going to have the kids start to be more self-assessing. This was based on fluency rubric that she had for the learning goals around reading aloud. And so what she did was she had them first co-create the rubric. What do you need to do to be more fluent? And obviously she worked with them and they came up with accuracy, rate, expression, and phrasing. Now that's no coincidence. Obviously, we all know that. These were the key ideas that she was teaching them. However, what they did do was they started to co-create with her. So what would it look like if I were accurate? And they have just three options. One, I'm not getting it. Two, I'm almost there. And three, woo, I got it. And she would give it. They came up with 4 or more mistakes. Don't go back and reread mistakes. If you have 2 or 3 mistakes, go back and reread some mistakes. If you have 1 to 2 mistakes, go back and reread all mistakes. So they're now beginning to understand this and they look at it. Now, what I loved was I grabbed this from one of the kids because I just loved it, got permission to change it, to share it. But I love this kid who was doing this. Notice the check marks. So I read too fast or too slow part of the time. And that was where the student saw as it circled there, that's where I need to improve. So I'm reading okay, but these are the places where I need to improve. And then notice finally the check marks. I get it. I know where I am and I'm now reading better. And what they learned was my reading fluency goal is to read with a little more feeling and emotion. So this student is now moving into the territory of read with feeling and emotion, be able to read so that somebody really wants to hear you. Now, what the teacher did was, in many instances, the kids put the little headphones on, read aloud, and they read it into a tape. They played it back. Well, tape, I don't know, in my days it was a tape. I'm sure now it's something else. But anyway, they read it into something that was really able to then let them play it back and hear it. And then from there, what they were able to do was score themselves and work on getting better at it. This teacher found this strategy was so powerful for the students that she went on to develop it not only in fluency, but in other aspects of reading. Now, this is one from a high school where they use this as a self-assessment tool for engagement with discourse. So many teachers now are saying, I just am seeing that the kids aren't engaging with discourse. I do, for example, they're interested in talking about critical issues, talking about some of the things like social justice and some of the things that are going on in current events. And I, as a social studies teacher, perhaps feel like this is a time when I could get them to really talk about it. So I get them going, and I find that when they're on remote, sometimes I see a lot of kids where I just find their name, I don't see their faces. I find some check out. I find some aren't really involved. And I'm not quite sure. And even when they're in class now, I'm finding it's harder to get them to really engage. So what I decided was I was going to use a fishbowl, and I was going to have observers and I was going to have students in a fishbowl. And we were going to work to see what engagement do we have with the discourse? How are we thinking about it? So this self-assessment tool, and by the way, it's a larger tool than this, and I've put it in the resources so that you can see it, use it, make it better. Let me know if you make it better, because it's one I'm experimenting with, but I've tried it out in a couple of places, and I'm finding that not only do students like to use this, but teachers are using this as a way of preparing themselves for discourse around critical issues, that they get into groups and they use this sometimes as part of a Socratic seminar. But here is the idea of it. The idea is that this is a continuum in which every place in the continuum is stated positively. So instead of saying, as some of the work that I've been doing this work with Giselle Martin-Kniep and Alison Zamuda, and some of the ways that we've been looking at this is, we see that so often people are saying things like, I want to make sure that students are in. So in the reflex zone, instead of calling it reflex, they'll call it isolated or not working. And what we started to say was, you know what? There are times when there's a benefit to just thinking to yourself. So we try to make every statement here as positive as possible along a continuum. So if you said, for example, I'm a high-level introvert and I don't just jump into anything, so that's okay. You can benefit from taking some time to sit with yourself and consider the meaning before you jump in. So it says, I'm not going to have a negative presupposition. I'm going to assume people are in or would like to be in, but they're really paying attention to how they engage. The next one is observes, which is sometimes I just like to see what other people are doing. Some people call this lurking. But what it is basically, I need to be listening to how people are thinking so it can inform my thinking. And so I'm getting kind of ready perhaps to jump in. And then participates is, now I'm ready perhaps to dialogue, to join, to be an active speaker or more active with my listening, because now I'm feeling safer. You know, this is a way of defining what we call that psychologically safe space. It's okay not to say something right away. And it's also okay to say something that may not be the most profound thing in the world, but what you want to do is you want to just hear your voice. You want to feel it's okay to participate, especially if there's no right or wrong answer and you're discussing a dilemma. We can have much more inclusive way of joining the discourse. And finally, when we're investing, it's not because we're right. It's not because our opinion is established. It's because we're good at sense making and summarizing and helping ourselves move the discourse along. So you notice that this is a way to begin to use this as an assessment tool, but not an assessment tool a teacher does. It's a self-assessment tool. So you will see that we ask reflective questions in each of these categories so that students can pay attention to, where am I in engagement with discourse, and where might I like to grow? How might I like to grow? For example, I would say some people who invest heavily in the beginning, and perhaps they're sharing their opinions right away, might say, you know what, maybe I should step back a little bit and think a little bit more before I just engage. Maybe I need to get a little more reflective as well. So it's an interesting self-assessment tool. Here's one from pre-calculus in Madison, Connecticut. And what he did was he said, what content do you feel that you need more growth in? Now that's really interesting because up to this point, he was very skeptical. What do you mean self-assessment in pre-calculus? What do you really think that the kids are going to talk about? How they solve problems? Do you really, I'm just not sure it fits in pre-calculus. And with a little encouragement, he came up with a couple of questions. And I just took this one because I thought it was really, it showed so well what's possible. Because if you notice, he said, the student says, I need to keep practice on testing for symmetry because the one I did not really understand it until right before the test. And he goes on to say he got it wrong, and here's why he got it wrong. But we highlighted what was most important here. However, if I really understood it, I would have realized that X and Y are opposite sides of Y axis, therefore, a reflection over Y, deeming it to have symmetry with respect to the Y axis symmetry. And the teacher, David Buller, says, that's a great conceptual learning. Surely, sorry you didn't have that for the test, but thrilled you have it now. So isn't that lovely that you can have a commentary and an engagement with a student, encouraging and fostering the power of that self-assessment and reflection? I'm going to move now to just thinking a little bit about the idea of how we make this play with making choices. So, for example, when you're making a choice as a student, how does that begin to reflect on your ability to make wise choices because you're beginning to think about the challenge and you're thinking about what about this choice will help me to be more prepared, more planful, more metacognitive about self-managing. So here's a sample teacher developed choice board, a choice board on vocabulary. So notice that she's done this. Now, what's interesting to me is, and this is based on Mike Anderson's book on learning to choose and choosing to learn, you notice that these are all fabulous choices. But if I don't know how to do a video, create a video clip that demonstrates my concept, if I don't know how to do that, what this teacher does is she gives me some options as to how I can learn how to do that. And each one of these is on the web so that you can learn. Now, notice the part about this is that too often we choose to do a video vocab because, whoo, that sounds like such a cool idea. But if we don't know how to do it, it can take more time to figure out how to do it than it can, and I may lose my investment in wanting to do it. So notice that this is really about giving choices, but also providing some of the strategies that you would need to make the choice real so that you don't get caught in a trap of having chosen something that's going to take far longer than you ever imagined. I know we've all been there before. Here's something from grades 2-3 in Council Rock. And what they do here is, you'll notice that they do research. They're very much interested in, you choose what topic you will do. We will give you the rubric for making your topic carefully researched the way we're looking for it. So again, the anchor is the rubric. You'll all be assessed in the same way. You'll all get feedback based on the same rubric. However, it's your choice, your choice. And this one, it was about studying insects that I saw, but there are many different choices. You can see how this would work. Again, personalizing, letting students find their own way, let them have their own choice, but ground it in a research rubric so that they know how to manage themselves and become more able to figure out, how do I do the ideas and content? How do I organize all of this? What word choices will I be thinking about? Again, making sure that we're providing students with the capacity to manage themselves, to monitor the progress, to modify it as they go along, and to really reflect upon what they're learning. This is another one where they've used the simpler form of this from another class where they added the habits of mind in. So in this one, they said, when you set a goal or choose a topic, and then they use the icon for that, which is you choose a topic, and then the icon is responding with wonderment and awe. So they're saying, when you did your insect research, you're choosing something. What did you just respond with wonderment and awe? Wow, I'm intrigued by this. I'm curious. I want to know more. Set a goal. And the habit of mind they chose was questioning and posing problems. What might you need to know? How would you begin to develop this? So this is the same insect research that they did. And this is the way that they guide them to begin to look at this. When you're coaching for thinking, think about the idea that what I've been saying, you're planning, you're monitoring, and you're reflecting. When planning for a project, you need to invite students to define their purpose, set and clarify it, envision, and anticipate which habits of mind they'll be using. When you're looking to see them planning, these are the kinds of considerations. You want them to take their time. You want them to think about how much time, what the resources, what the audience will be, what alternatives do they need, what assessment, what criteria for excellence will they have. So this is where you're helping them to question and to help them develop a plan. And then while they're working on their projects, you're asking them, what's going well? You're monitoring. How are you knowing that your success? What habits of mind are you employing? So keeping them aware, keeping them conscious of it. And then helping them anticipate which habit of mind will serve you best. Tell us more. Think about it. Look at the habits of mind. Which do you feel will serve you best? And then when the students have completed their projects, ask them to self-modify by reflecting. What have you learned from the way you've planned? How might you coach yourself the next time when you have to do a project? Well, I've given you a lot to think about. However, I'm also aware that you can slow it up. You can think about it. You can break this up and you can take small chunks of it because it's all recorded. And you can also always go to the resources and you will be able to find a lot of the material that you can study, that you can use as a way of improving and growing self-direction with your students in your classrooms and in your schools. So I leave you with this because I've always loved this. This is from Alan Kay, who worked with the Apple Computer Company. And what he said was, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And you have in your hands every day the future. And I know that you're helping them to be prepared to invent it. Thank you so much for being with me.